Good evening. Welcome to Mirador's Round Table with a full house tonight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panelists, all with different viewpoints and all very vocal when they can be. My job is to keep them in line, and I'll try very hard. I'm Keith Hayes, and I would like to start off by saying, we the people. Oh yeah, once we've voted, we the people rarely count. And one of the big issues that has come between us and perhaps those who govern us is the question of climate change. Is what we want what our leaders actually do? And that's the question that we posed to the panel tonight. And as it was suggested by Suzanne Mouchot from New York, I think, Suzanne, it's only fair that you should have the first word.
Okay. So so you're not asking. So the reason that I brought it up was because I thought that because of this incredible bloom of flora and fauna after COVID, that I think it gave everyone a renewed interest in trying to combat climate change. So I thought that it would be great to talk about it across the United States and Great Britain and see what everybody thought. So.
And what do you think?
Well, I think that there should be much more of a focus on renewable energies. There's no reason why we can't make it happen. It's become more affordable. It's become more practical. More research and development should be invested in it. And I think that we should just start making it a major focus across the world, actually.
All right, Mark, you're sitting on Suzanne's head in this scheme of things. Let's hear from you, because you're a politician. Is the political will there to do what Suzanne is suggesting?
I think there is, yes. And I think what we're seeing is the people's will pressing down on the politicians, so they all find the will to deliver as a result. I think right across the board there are requirements. It's not just about climate change, it's about thinking about how we control toxins going into the environment, how we deal with our rubbish, which is one thing that I think is a significant aspect that tends to get overlooked. People just throw their stuff away thinking it's somebody else's problem. In reality, every community has to look after their own. In the UK, we were shipping stuff abroad, and that's how we were ducking the issue about landfill tax. And that shouldn't have been happening. We're producing rubbish, we should deal with it. We're producing toxins, we should deal with it. We are depleting the Earth's resources by using carbon fuels. It's our responsibility to try and find a way out of that and find a sustainable future. Whether there's climate change or not, I think it's actually a good practice to clear up after yourself.
Okay, Stephen, you, I think, are quite cynical about this. Let's hear from you.
I'm cynical because, really, having seen the pictures of the mess on Bournemouth Beach after the first sunny weekend free of lockdown, I've come to the conclusion that basically the people are slobs and they are making the mess and not really wanting to do anything about it. So first, I would say, economically, we do not know how local authorities or central government will be placed. Once the lockdown is finally eased, we do not know what holes there will be in divers' exchequers around the country. So people must take the initiative themselves, and that is where it is going to be difficult, getting people to accept responsibility. And people must take responsibility for the results of their actions. We have to hammer that home, I think. But at the moment,
you're the financier. Oh, sorry, I've lost you. There, Paul, you're the financier. After lockdown is over, is the government going to want to spend money on what it sometimes has seen in the past as something low down the priority list?
As a cynic, I'd say that's correct. Stephen raised a very good point. The one thing that we have is economics versus climate. Takes Australia and China, who are huge fossil fuel producers. What's happened is, of course, in Victoria and Australia, they've got about 80,000 jobs dependent on that fuel. Now, obviously, the fuel being burnt will affect the climate change. But have a guess what? The government has said we must use some of that fossil fuel. So you've got to get at the remnants of that and get over that. Governments don't like to waste things, etc. But that's a huge. China and Australia alone produce vast amount of bad gas, etc. So it's a tough one. And my view is public attitude. I totally agree with Stephen. Public attitude is one thing. Now that COVID's over, we should. God knows why we put climate change in the background. This is the key. This is the number one priority.
Melissa, Kyoto is governments have sort of made a big play about we'll all get together and we'll set standards, but much of those standards seem to be thrown out of the window. Are we throwing the bathwater out, or the baby with the bathwater?
Well, I mean, in terms of the United States, our government isn't very strong on the environment. It's more geared toward economics. I would say they're not mutually exclusive. There are many corporations in America that would like to participate in helping for a better environment, but there just isn't that will in Washington, D.C. right now.
Annie, where are you? There you are. Annie, we always ask you from really the family point of view, how much concern about the environment and what governments are doing is there in your family? Because I know that you're very vital, particularly with your relatives from overseas, in discussing all sorts of things that are happening here and happening in the world.
Yes. Well, if we continue on like this, we won't have an environment soon. But it's also a big money business, isn't it? How the country deals with the rubbish. So when I don't think it is fair for any country to take their rubbish somewhere else, but it's a good business because those countries get paid for it. Yes, well, responsibility. In our society, many people think they have rights, but no responsibility. Hence the cleaning up after yourself on the beach.
Yeah, well, you're echoing my belief is that, that there are a lot of people that, including, I may say, the media in many parts of the world, who believe in the right to yell and scream, but no responsibility. But Suzanne, I don't know why I put an E on the end there, Susanna, but it's Suzanne. Can you tell me, you actually painted a nice picture, and I imagine dancing through meadows with daisies and so on and so forth, with pure air and so on. Now you've heard from your colleagues, what's your feeling about generally how we, the people, are tackling everything?
Well, I did never waver from my optimism, so that's one thing to say. But the other is that, I mean, all of these points are very good ones, and I think that there are levels of engagement for really taking responsibility for our environment, meaning it should be entire governments, it should be individual local governments, it should be an individual themselves, it should be families fostering responsibility, absolutely. But I do think that you have to probably attack it from all of those, not one individually leading to the other. So in reference to the rubbish kind of concept and making sure that people are taking care of their own refuse, I think that's something that's probably well overlooked around the world, and it's something that needs to be addressed. But what I would say is that just in general, you know, to Annie's point, that unless we start doing it, we're not going to have anything to actually take care of anyway. So it just has to be a priority. And my hope is that seeing, even just hearing the birds singing with such vigor throughout this entire time, that we should just be reminded of our responsibilities at all levels, not only individual, but also governmental.
Mark, our Prime Minister had made much about the common sense of the British people, God bless him, that they will respond to everything to do with lockdown and so on and so forth. But how about the environment? Not much evidence there, but Suzanne said local, and you actually represent a local constituency, if I can use that word. What's your feeling about what she said?
Well, I think that we've seen locally people haven't been particularly well behaved, certainly during the lockdown period. One of the things I'd received several complaints about we have a local beauty spot where people were able to drive up to and sit out, maybe take a walk, and they were just dumping their rubbish up there, faster than the council could take away the rubbish. And instead of taking their rubbish home with them, they would just leave it piled up around the bins. I think that's indicative of the attitude that it's somebody else's problem. So there's a level of education that's needed. And on the whole, people are fairly well clued up about putting their rubbish out, separating their rubbish into different streams. So you have recyclable elements, stuff that has to go to landfills, stuff that is going to go to compost with their home rubbish. But somehow, the moment they leave their front door, they leave that attitude behind and seem to think that somebody else is going to clear up after them. I think
Stephen, you have a rather less favourable view of what people will do as opposed to what they should do. What's your response to Mark?
Well, I think Mark's pretty well on the nail there. One of the things I would have said to Suzanne is the reason the birds were singing and wildflowers were growing is because people weren't about. We have to note the bad impression we make on the countryside and all the rest of it, and we have to learn to do better. I'm tired of going in the churchyard at All Saints and finding people have left their lunch wrappers around the place. They can't even take those with them. And, well, like I said earlier, we're an awful load of slobs in this country, really. And we expect people to do it for us. It's noticeable.
What about Biggles and the great British character?
What great British character? We're a breed of mongrels. Well, you know that. You know your history. We came from everywhere and suddenly had an empire, although it would have been better if it was a hippodrome or a winter garden. We had an empire and thought we were the dog's what's-its. No, we're not. And we have to begin to face reality of a new Britain, not necessarily great, certainly after the end of this year, not great at all, and perhaps not even a united Ireland anymore. Let's see what happens in Scotland. We have to now face up to a new way of living and knuckle down to doing it. It seems common sense to me. This is a new order. We need a new order, and we will have to stand up to the nail and actually make sure we all do our bit.
Right, Melissa, I suppose really the word mongrel could be applied to the United States, and yet united you seem to the rest of the world to have become. But are you united, and what is the response of your leaders to a new order?
No, we're a divided nation for sure. I don't think we have a leader that cares too much about it. We did in the past, even on the Republican side. I mean, you go back to Richard Nixon, he was the one who started the Environmental Protection Agency. So it was in fact a Republican issue, but it no longer seems to be. It's almost as though we need some kind of a disaster to get us to do anything, like COVID or, you know, our racial tensions, something horrible like we'll need an oil spill or a Category 6 hurricane in order for us to wake up to see what's going on. Right now, we're just overwhelmed with COVID. We're overwhelmed with our economic problems. We're overwhelmed with our, you know, the racial issues. So I think the environment, for now anyway, I don't think it's in the front of people's minds. Certainly not our government.
Yeah, Stephen mentioned a new order. There'll be new thinking after lockdown has ended. Is there any indication of that from you?
I don't see it. I mean, it sounds almost, and I mean, Suzanne can certainly, maybe you might agree with me, Suzanne. I don't see the amount of, I mean, we do have the trash and everything, but I think that people, certainly in New York, are a little more conscientious about things. Mm-hmm. You know, recycling, the recycling bins and everything else. So I think a lot of it, as Suzanne indicated, it's education. It's almost like, you know, now we all wear our seatbelts because it's just something that we have just been taught to do and taught to do. So it just has to be ingrained in us.
Okay, Paul, Annie mentioned, you know, moving rubbish and so on and so forth, and there's always somebody who's going to make money out of misery. It is the question of the finances that can be garnered by perhaps less than moral people likely to have a big effect economically.
Well, you know, we think COVID is the big deal, but the climate change is saving the world. If Attenborough and everybody else is to be believed, we have to act within 10 to 15 years, which I think is reasonable. I liken the public attitude to somebody who's looking at a car in a long, long distance away and smiling, and that car is actually closer than they think it is. I don't think the public must be educated, if not cajoled. As Melissa and Annie said, we've got to save the world, if you like. So you can't do that pussyfooting away. I don't believe there's any government that has the will at the moment. But certainly China and other countries are flouting that. Quick little story for you. A Tesco bag left Britain, dumped in the sea, and reached Fremantle, Australia. It made the journey over 3,000 miles. And Fremantle has never, it's a beautiful place, never had Tesco bags arriving there. That disturbs me.
Was the ice cream inside still edible?
Yeah, I tried it, but it was it had a brown flavour. Yes.
Annie, you very much see around you people marching for all sorts of things. Are you ever tempted to go onto the streets with a placard? And you often, in discussions that I have with you, you say our generation. How does our generation, from your point of view, feel about protesting what's going on in terms of the environment?
What do you mean by our generation? Mine or yours?
Yours. I know what mine's thinking.
There is a difference.
So much younger.
Well,
Mine can't wait to get to the pub.
I think we're all like that, really. I think my generation was still brought up with some sort of responsibility. The next generation, I don't think so.
Mm. Yeah.
So there's, yeah. It's not just the people who have to play their part really. It's also the supermarkets, let's say, or the packaging, right? It's very easy to say, oh, you have to do your recycling. But when you look into recycling, you suddenly find out that many of the things that you put into your recycling bin cannot be recycled.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
There's a lot of pressure, let's say, put on the customer, right?
Could I come in here, Keith, on this one? I agree with Mark, Stephen, Annie, and Melissa and everybody. What we have to do is actually, I think people generally are concerned, but they think somebody else is doing it. And so, as Stephen said, it's a matter of education and actually telling them this will happen. We will not have a world in 10 to 12 years if not careful. And if you look at the bushfires in Australia, the catastrophes over there, that's the beginning of it. There's no doubt about it.
Stephen, is there any appetite amongst governments to do a big education program? I know we hear screaming and yelling about we've put so many millions of dollars into this, so £1 million and so on, but the true appetite has got to come from the will to do things. Is that appetite there?
I think the appetite is there with the people who elect the governments, but governments such as we seem to have at the moment have a lot of back pocket interests, if you don't mind my suggesting that, and even if you do, I will, because there was a large refuse disposal firm. It drives a big red truck with its name in white on the side, who has been fined and I think likely to lose its license because, disguised as waste paper, it exported to China or Turkey, I can't remember now, a whole load of used disposable nappies, which certainly weren't paper, and it just did it because that's the way they do things. If you cannot trust the corporations paid to do the work, how can you trust the government that insists these things are privatized and not run by a nationalized organization? You see, it stinks. The fiver changes hands and becomes £10. £10 changes hands and becomes 20. What is the aggregate cost of all this favor doing that seems to be a way of getting contracts in the world today? I don't understand it.
Right, Stephen, we're coming into the end of our time, so I'm going to give a little round robin for everybody to have a final comment. So would you like a very quick final comment since I'm talking to you at the moment?
Pull your bloody socks up, England, and deal with the problem yourself.
Melissa?
How about we not purchase things that have packaging that we know can't be recycled? How about just not buying it?
Paul?
Educate the general public and cajole those pariah nations who actually breach any regulations. Like there should be something set up by the UN, etc., to actually control all this. Otherwise, we will go down.
Any?
Less packaging should be used by the corporations. If it's there, it will be bought. So
Mark?
it's both sides.
Take responsibility for yourself and avoid things like carbon trading and shipping rubbish off to somebody else to process.
Mm-hmm.
Suzanne? I can think of nothing more delightful than perhaps walking through a meadow with the bees and the butterflies hand in hand with you. But I don't think that's going to happen, so you can have the final word.
Well, that sounds lovely to me too, Keith. My final word is that COVID-19 is accelerating change in all aspects of our world, social, environmental, racial. And so we either have to accept it and move on, or we'll be left behind.
Thank you to the panel for their comments this evening. I can remember as a young man in Vancouver going to a party, a very nice party. It was a black tie affair. And in the morning, I woke up on the living room floor with bottles and glasses stacked neatly around me. And when I got up, there was my figure right in the middle of them. It never did occur to me. I wonder who collected the bottles and the glasses. Till next week, good night.
Night.
Right.
Good night.
Bye.